Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. It's Eric Edmeades. I'm back with another episode of Thrive Time. I'm really excited about today's episode because we get to talk about something that I am incredibly passionate about, and I hope you will be too by the end of this. And the question that I really want to ask this time around, is sugar causing the COVID pandemic? Yes, I want to throw another conspiracy theory out there into the world. And let me be clear about the question. I want you to hear it properly. I am not suggesting that sugar causes the virus. I'm not suggesting that. I'm not suggesting that bats ate sugar in a cave in China and caused the virus. I'm not suggesting that a bunch of scientists in a lab in China ate too much sugar and created the virus. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about something rather more simple, and that is that anytime a series of events take place that cause a problem, it's always interesting to go in and look at what you might call keystone influences. As in, is there a single influence that you can take a look at and say, wow, if that influence was not present, is it possible Is it possible that the entire thing could have been averted? And I want to suggest to you that sugar may well be a keystone influence relative to the COVID-19 situation, relative to the entire lockdown, relative to the economic devastation that we're facing in the world today. It might be because of sugar. And so in order to make this presentation, or in order to present this argument to you effectively, I want to share some things that are pretty fascinating about what's going on right now. Pretty fascinating, I should say, about what's going on at the moment. One of the things that we're really clear about is that we've seen a tremendous spike over the last several years, the last several decades, in the growth of type 2 diabetes around the world and in the United States in particular. We know that those statistics exist, and we know that they're causing significant stress, pain, suffering, and financial devastation to our economies around the world, and a great deal of personal suffering. But how does that relate? How does that relate to COVID-19 and the lockdown? And so what we would need to do to evaluate that is look at a couple of other influences. For example, we can see that the mortality risk of COVID-19 is tied to other things. In other words, if you have cardiovascular disease, you are 10%. You have a 10% risk of dying if you contract disease. If you have diabetes, you have just less than 10%. If you have a chronic respiratory disease, you have about 7%. If you have hypertension, you're about 7%. If you have cancer, you're about 7%. If you don't have one of those diseases, the odds of COVID-19 killing you are 0.3%. Incredibly small. So I think it's important for us to take a look at the fact that each of the conditions that we're talking about here, each of those conditions relate in some way to sugar. Every single one of them. Every single one of them. And then the question has to be asked, at least I feel that has to be asked, did the sugar industry know this? Was there a point in time where maybe they were aware of the damage that they were doing? And if they became aware, what did they decide to do about it? And I think this is a very important conversation for us to be having right now, because it's entirely possible that this entire situation could have been averted with some corporate responsibility and proper governmental regulation. In the 1950s, there was credible science that was beginning to suggest that there was a direct correlation and perhaps a cause relationship between the consumption and the increased consumption of sugar and the development of heart disease. In the 1940s, during the Great World War II, there was a change in the American diet, and that change was stimulated largely by the economic growth and explosion that happened post-World War II. People started eating sugar. They started eating it like they'd never eaten it before. And by the 1950s, it was clear then that there was a direct relationship between this increased consumption in sugar and the development of heart disease. The sugar industry, wanting to do something about this, decided that they would. They decided that they would do something about this. And what they did about it was they engaged two Harvard researchers, and they commissioned them to undertake a study to find out what was really going on here, except that the study wasn't so much about finding out what was really going on here as it was a study to instead frame fat, to instead blame fat for the damage that they were really doing. And this taking place is a moment in our history that changed everything. It absolutely changed everything. At the time, there were a number of campaigns going on where the sugar industry was making statements. They were saying that most of the focus in popular media and the scientific press is that, oh my gosh, they're eating too much. They're eating too much. And ultimately, that they started blaming sugary drinks. And the group's president, Stephen Blair, says, as an exercise scientist, that there's virtually no evidence that that's true. There's virtually no evidence that that's true. But of course, we all know that it is true. And we now know that health experts are telling us that this message has been misleading and that this message was specifically created by a particular company in order to divert the blame for the role that they'd played in creating these problems around our world and around our country. We're in a place where the sugar industry and many of the sugar giants knew what was going on. And rather than change their food and rather than change their products in a way that would support us and make things better, They decided instead to attack the principles that would have helped people and to blame fat for the damage that they were doing. And in case you have any doubt about their intention behind this, Mr. Henry Haas, the president of the Sugar Research Foundation, which you can find at sugar.org and is just a big lobbyist for the sugar industry, said this: leading nutritionists are pointing out the chemical connection between Americans' high-fat diet and the formation of cholesterol, which partly plugs our arteries, capillaries, and restricts the flow of blood, causing high blood pressure and heart trouble. There's something you need to know about those leading nutritionists. They were bought and paid for. They were bought and paid for. They were the Harvard researchers that they paid in today's money about $50,000 to say those things. They were bought and paid for. They continue. Henry Haas continued to say this at a conference in 1954 of the Sugar Beets Growers Association. If you put the middle-aged man on a calorie restriction diet, on a low-fat diet, I should say, it takes just 5 days for the blood cholesterol to get down to where it should be. If the carbohydrate industries were to recapture this 20% of the calories in the US diet, the difference between the 40% which fat currently holds and the 20% which it ought to hold, then, and if sugar maintained its present state of the carbohydrate market, this would mean an increase in the per capita consumption of sugar more than a third, with a tremendous improvement in general health. No, that's not what it was going to mean. What it was going to mean is that if we could trick people into eating less fat, we could do them damage. And then if we could trick them into eating more profit, or more sugar, we could generate even more profit and cause devastation. So then let's take a look again at the graph that I showed you a little bit earlier. This is the growth of diabetes since the mid-50s to today. It is absolutely astronomical. In the 1970s, there was virtually nobody under the age of 40 years old that had type 2 diabetes. In fact, they called it adult onset diabetes in order to make that distinction, in order to be clearer that there's a difference between type 1, which was something that children got, and type 2, which is something that adults got. Only now, today, adults you don't have to wait to be an adult to get type 2. In fact, we're now dealing with something in the realm of 20 million young Americans dealing with type 2 diabetes. Now, I want to go back to this other conversation about, wait a minute, what are the comorbidities? What are the other diseases that people are facing and suffering with when they're dealing with this issue? What are the other diseases that they're dealing with? Well, what we absolutely know is that the diseases that people are suffering with that are contributing to morbidity are cardiovascular disease, diabetes, hypertension, respiratory disease, and cancer, all of which are at the very minimum influenced by excessive sugar consumption. And so what I want to put to you is that if COVID-19 had struck in the 1960s, if COVID-19 had happened in the 1960s, we wouldn't even know about it. We wouldn't even know about it because in order to get sick from COVID-19, you need to have another disease. And that disease just about has to be a sugar-influenced disease. As it stands today, the numbers coming out, which will improve over time. You've noticed the numbers change, right, over time. When they started this whole thing, they said 10% mortality. Then it was 3% mortality. Then it was 1% mortality. And you will start to see even this week that they're going to start reporting it at 0.2 and 0.3% mortality. It's not nearly as dangerous as they originally said it was, but it is incredibly dangerous in a population that has a major sugar addiction problem. The average American is eating 154 pounds of sugar a year. And that is contributing to the development of a variety of different diseases. Now, in order to pass away, in order to die as a result of COVID-19, these are the conditions that pretty much have to exist. 50%, almost 50% of the people that are dying from COVID-19 have 3 other major diseases, all influenced by excess sugar consumption, excess carbohydrate consumption. And then another 25% of them have 2 diseases, and another 25% of them have 1 disease, and almost nobody without those diseases is adversely affected by this virus. And so again, I ask you, if COVID-19 happened in the 1960s, would we even know? I don't think so. I don't think we would know, because it wouldn't have had enough of the population. There wouldn't have been enough people in the population that were susceptible to it for it to take root. And so today we're going to talk about diet, food rules, and sugar, and the fact that sugar might have been the keystone influence to trigger the COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, welcome back, everybody, to Thrive Time. You've had my little rant on the sugar industry, and I want you all to know that you're welcome to join me in the conversation. The team will be posting the link with you. And I am fascinated by this topic, and I'm fascinated about your opinions of that topic. In fact, I think we're going to jump right over in a minute here. We're going to jump right over to have a conversation with I think it's going to be Marsha, it's got to be. Marsha, you are live. Jump on in. Welcome to Thrive Time. Glad to have you here. Yes.
Wait, can you hear me? Yes. Okay, I wasn't listening to you. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. So my question was, how did you think that sugar could influence also people on COVID-19 if they don't have any of those pre-existing conditions? I actually was just, I did my antibody test because I was in contact with someone who had it, and I realized that I'm positive. I did the Wild Fit diet two years ago, and I cut sugars, and I'm really thankful for the effect that it has in my life. But I saw, some friends around me had it, and they had a bit of consequences, although they do also a bit of healthy diet, let's just say. They don't cut on so many things like sugar and stuff like that. But they were all okay, basically. But I would like to know, because here in New York, there was even some cases of people like, I think it was somebody from Broadway that was supposed to have a good, a healthy food. We never know what people consider healthy when they say they have a healthy food diet, right? But supposedly it was in shape, and it kind of like affected more like in the brain. I think he had a stroke or something like that. So what do you think could be triggering that, and what is the relationship with sugar there?
Okay, so I think that sugar influences us in a number of different ways. There's the long-term systemic ingestion of sugar. So, when somebody starts as a child getting introduced to sugar and they're eating too much of it, then of course we go in the obvious directions. For example, obesity, diabetes, and those things. And those create the obvious comorbidities. Those create the things that are clearly an influence. Then there's the next conversation, and that is, what if somebody is generally healthy, but they do have a sugar issue? In other words, their blood sugar management isn't perfect, or maybe they're pre-diabetic and they don't yet know it. Because, by the way, 1/3 of Americans are either pre-diabetic or diabetic at this point. So we're dealing with the fact that even people who look relatively healthy may well be dealing with blood sugar off the scale. And so it appears that COVID-19 also likes healthy people with high blood sugar. Now, it doesn't seem to kill them the same way, but it seems to influence their likelihood to end up in hospital or get sick. But there's something else that's really important to discuss here, Marsha, and that's this. I am not suggesting that somebody, if they don't eat sugar, that they won't get sick. I'm not suggesting that if they don't eat sugar, they won't catch the virus. That's not how immunology works. Immunology, the best way I can describe it to you, works like this. If you have immunity from prosecution, then what that means is you cannot be prosecuted. You have immunity from prosecution. So somebody who has the antibodies for smallpox can't get smallpox. They have immunity from smallpox. But somebody who doesn't have immunity from prosecution needs a powerful defense team. And then the defense team has to defend them. And that's your immune system. So you have immunity established by your memory B cells being able to create antibodies for a given virus. And then you have your immune system, which is defending you while you try to develop these antibodies or the ability to manufacture them. And so what that means is somebody can be unbelievably healthy and they can still get COVID-19. It's just that it's entirely likely that they won't have a great deal of symptomology. Now, Marsha, did I hear you say that you had the antibody test and you tested positive?
Yes.
So
and
you've had COVID-19.
So the interesting thing about it is that when I did Wild Fit, I cut also on dairy, and I had a lot of infection of my sinuses before, and that really helped me calm down. That doesn't mean that I don't get sinuses. I still get some now and then, but I don't suffer like before. Before I used to get really infected. And so what I felt actually was a bit of a cough, um, following, being with that person, because that was right around my birthday and was just before we start the lockdown here in New York. And then I felt a bit of a cough, but I just did some vapors with some eucalyptus oil, and like 3 to 4 days it was gone, right? So no infection, nothing. And so I didn't relate that to COVID-19 because I didn't have really like fevers or any of the other symptoms. And I really think it had to do with my immune system and how I have been treating myself with my diet.
Exactly. So let me understand. What happened is you've tested positive for the antibodies. So you have had COVID-19, but you really didn't have much in the way of symptoms. Am I hearing
No.
you correctly?
Yeah.
Then you're the perfect case study for exactly what I've been talking about. I couldn't have lined you up as the better first guest. Again, everybody, I want you to know that the idea here is not to suggest that sugar or not eating sugar is going to affect whether or not you encounter or contract the virus. It just might have everything to do with your ability to fight the virus. And so now, here we are. Marsha's been through it. It wasn't so bad for her. Now she has the antibodies. Now she has immunity from prosecution. And Marsha, so what I want to suggest is that there's two different ways that we want to be looking at sugar at this point. One is the long-term systemic ingestion of sugar that's causing people serious diseases that are making them incredibly susceptible. And then there's people that are more or less healthy at this stage that should probably be being careful about allowing their blood sugar to get absolutely crazy, because it appears that having high blood sugar makes it easier for the virus to propagate and cause problems. So I think that answers your question, and I'm so glad that you were the first guest on the show. What a fascinating conversation.
Well, I decided to join the Wild Fit coaching program
after good deal.
Started because I really wanted, people to be more aware that they can take better care of themselves. And I actually started doing some Instagram posts before, about sugar and COVID-19, how people should not be baking at this point and should be taking better care of themselves. And I had a bit of backslash from some of my friends saying that I was shaming them when it was not my intention. So I'm learning a lot. So hopefully, we can do better.
Absolutely. I am so excited to have you. Are you in the current coaching class now?
Yes.
Oh, good deal. Well, congratulations on that. Super glad to have you on the team. And I'll just offer you one thought about that idea that people feel shamed. The industry has been built to create shame in people, the food industry and the diet industry, because both of them work very well. Look, if you constantly feel a sense of shame, you're going to need to be on a million diets. And if you constantly feel a sense of shame, you're going to want to eat a lot of garbage. So it kind of suits the industry to work on a model of shame. In our case, one of the things that I always want to make people clear of and really clear about is that anybody who's dealing with what we consider today to be a lifestyle disease does not have a lifestyle disease. It is my contention that even the phrase lifestyle disease is a disgusting misinterpretation. It's a disgusting shifting of the blame from the food industry and the government onto the consumer for their disastrous food manufacturing processes, their disastrous food marketing policies, and the unbelievably disgusting lobbying practices and terrible governmental regulation. And so I don't think of them as lifestyle disease at all. I believe that nobody is to blame for the health conditions that they're dealing with in this moment if they're food related. If somebody's obese or type 2 diabetic, it's not their fault. The challenge is that it's their responsibility to do something about it, because nobody else will ever care as much about their health as they will. Not even a Wild Fit coach. I know they will, but everybody's got to be in charge of their own health as best possible. Marsha, thank you so much for coming on the show and being our first guest today. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, fast. What a great start. What a great start. And again, I want to make this point that I am not suggesting that sugar is causing COVID-19 itself. I'm suggesting that sugar could be a keystone influence. And had we removed it as a major staple food, if we had corrected our relationship with carbohydrates, or if we'd even left them as they were, we may not be under a lockdown of any kind. I want to tell you that a science advisor to the Ministry of Health in Italy examined 1,000 of the early COVID deaths and found that 88% of them were already sick. 88% of them were already sick. And of course, now that they're diving more into that data, it's turning out that it's more like 98% or more. So I just think this is a really important conversation for us to be having, because this is not likely to be the last virus to make its way around the world. And so what we want to do is make sure that we are in the best possible condition. And I am curious to know what Debbie has to say about that. Debbie, welcome to the show. Good to have you here.
Make sure that we are in the best possible condition. And
hey, Debbie, you're going to need to mute your other screen because we can get the feedback.
Good to have you here.
Hi, sorry about the lighting. It's very bad here in my house.
Hi, Debbie, you're going to need to mute.
Debbie, can you turn your volume off, please?
Okay. Hi, sorry about the lighting. It's very bad.
Okay, and everybody that's in the waiting room, if you're watching the show separately, when you come into the waiting room, very important, you turn the other screen off.
Sorry about the lighting. It's very bad.
Okay, Debbie, you can work on that. We're going to have to go to another guest while we figure out what's going on there with your sound. Okay, I am going to be going over to Lily as soon as I can get Lily queued up, and hopefully the sound there is a little better. Debbie, we will come back and give you another try in a moment. Lily, you are live. Welcome to the show.
Oh, hi, everyone. Hey, it's great to see you. Well, I just came in from gardening, like hours of gardening. I did my whole vegetable garden, and here you are talking about sugar, which is fantastic, because I pretty much went off of sugar. I never really was on sugar like crazy, but one of the things that I wanted to ask you was that even the psychology of using fake sugar, substitute sugar, I think also kind of has you wanting the sugar. So what I usually like to do is suggest to people and just tell me what you feel on it about it, is that if you just can kind of start to really love things that do not taste like that sweetness, where you don't have this habit, if you will, of constantly wanting sweets. And I was thinking about that, as I was planting my vegetables just now, that, I didn't have, any desire to, I'm looking forward to the vegetables. It's something that I like. It's something that I enjoy. However, I do notice that a lot of people really consume a lot of artificial sweetener, which I feel is possibly just as dangerous. So what are your thoughts on that? I just was curious.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of artificial sweeteners or any of the fake sugar things. One of the things, think about this, for example, Lily, is it possible that I could right now talk to you about a favorite food of yours and potentially make you salivate? Is that possible?
Uh-huh.
Right. So in other words, your nervous system doesn't need reality in order to react. Your nervous system doesn't need reality. It just needs your perception of reality. And so what I would suggest is that if you walk into a steakhouse and you smell a bunch of steak, your body is going to start producing the digestive fluids to process the steak because it knows what's going on. And so when we eat something sweet, even if it's not sugar, the body still goes, oh, something sweet. And it starts doing what it's supposed to do.
Yes.
And so I am not a fan of fake sugar, alcohol sugar, and all these different things. The fact of the matter is that if something tastes sweet, it's meant to taste sweet. You're meant to have that sweet taste, but nature never made those things available in the kind of plentitude that we do now. It was a very rare and seasonal thing. And so I would say if you're going to eat sugar, I would prefer that you ate actual sugar, like ideally in the form of, say, fresh fruit or honey, not processed in any possible way, and certainly not made up in a lab just down the street from the one in Wuhan. I'm not interested in fake. I want to focus on real. And so what that means is, yeah, I eat fruit. Of course I do. I eat honey from time to time. But what I recognize is that I and my ancestors would never have been so fortunate as to have fruit be available to us on a regular basis, which would have meant that, of course, our pancreas would have gotten a break from time to time. And so, no, I'm not a fan of the fake sugars. I don't think it's a great idea. I believe that if you want to have something sweet, then just eat something that's actually naturally sweet. But recognize that anytime you eat something sweet, you are likely creating the desire for something sweet the next day as well.
Yes, like this. Truth be told, when I came in from gardening, I mean, just before you came live, I was eating fresh raspberries, but they're not even really that sweet. It's actually not even a sweet type of fruit, is it? So yeah, I mean, I don't know if it does me any good or bad, but I mean, I felt fine.
Well,
And I don't
again,
do it every day. I don't do it every day.
no, of course not. And that's the whole thing. If you were doing it every day, then perhaps your pancreas would say, "Well, hold on a second, what's going on here?" Right? Like
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
pancreas is such a fascinating organ. Like it's responsible for so much. But two of the main jobs that it does, one is it produces insulin when you eat sugar, and it's meant to do that. It's meant to do that. So anybody who's like, "No, don't eat sugar ever." No, they're wrong. They're wrong. They're more right than eat sugar every day, but they're still wrong. Our body was designed to get seasonal access to sugar. And so what happens is you start producing all this insulin. Your body says, oh, look, there's sugar. What can I do? Well, I can put some in my blood. Oh, my blood is full. Now what can I do? I can put it in my liver or my muscles in the form of glycogen and store it there. Oh, now my liver and muscles are full of glycogen. Now what can I do? I could store it as fat. And that the whole system is designed that way. And then when you then move to a season where you're eating a lot more bitter greens or high fat proteins and that kind of stuff, then what happens? It switches gears and it says, oh, let's produce glucagon. And then it says, let's take some of that glycogen and burn that. Let's take some of that fat and burn that. And so it's meant for us to go through these cycles. And I think artificial sweeteners just get in the way of messing all that stuff up. So if you're going to eat it, I'm with you. Let's grab a raspberry. I'm going to go try and find some today myself.
Okay.
Thanks so much. Good to have you on the show, Lily. All right, excellent conversation. We're coming back to the overall topic of, is sugar causing the COVID pandemic? And again, I want to say it because I've seen a couple of comments, and I want to be clear. No, it's not causing the virus, but it might be creating the conditions in the population that make it possible for the virus to be dangerous. So we're going to go to Debbie again. We're going to see if Debbie's sound is working a little better. Debbie, I hope it is. Welcome to the show.
Hello, hello.
Hallo, hoe gaat het?
Baie goed, dankie. Firstly, first question was, what's the connection between sugar and cancer?
Well, I think we have to remember that cancer is a very big word. And there are many types of cancer, but there is clearly evidence that sugar is bad for cancer. Sure, like there are cancers that just absolutely feed on somebody having a lot of sugar in their diet, and so sugar definitely has a relationship to some types of cancer. Again, cancer being such a big word, I can't say that it's the case in every single case. But I'll tell you something. This is a little off. This is a little out there. We probably have to edit this out later. Okay, but I just want to point something out that I have kind of softly mentioned on the Odd Podcast interview, but I want to remind everybody that Ashton Kutcher played Steve Jobs in one of the films about Steve Jobs, and Ashton Kutcher wanted to be like a method actor, so he wanted to really get into the mind of Steve. And so, Steve went through a phase of only eating apples. I have no idea if that's how the branding came about, but that's what happened. He ate only fruitarian. And so Ashton Kutcher decided to do that as well. And then one day I stumble upon this article in some entertainment magazine that Ashton Kutcher had to be rushed off the set of the hospital of the show to go to the hospital because his pancreas had shut down. His pancreas had shut down because probably he was eating far too much sugar. But then I'm forced to draw this connection without any scientific basis behind it, but I'm forced to point this out. Steve Jobs died of pancreatic cancer. And so I don't think that those things are unrelated. And I believe that sugar and cancer are definitely a problem. And again, we can look at the graphs here. 100 years ago, people ate a fraction of the sugar they eat today. A fraction, a tiny fraction. And look what happened. When did it really begin to spike? Right after World War II. Our incredibly generous friends, I don't necessarily need to mention the name, but our incredibly generous friends at the soft drink company in Atlanta, Georgia, with the big red logo, they were giving away free Coca-Cola to the soldiers around the world. Like they were like any good drug dealer offering the first one free. And so when the economic revival happened post-World War II, what happens next? An incredible explosion of sugar consumption in America. And where 100 years ago, cancer and heart disease didn't even factor into the top 10 causes of death in the United States, they now take up the number 1 and 2 spot and are responsible for 66% of all death in the United States. And I think there's the increasing sugar consumption is definitely part of that. So I hope that answered your question. Do you have a follow-up?
Yes, I did. So, and the statistics are definitely showing the connection between COVID-19 and all these other diseases. So was the lockdown ever necessary? Is it as contagious as they say it is?
Well, the latest graph from the CDC, which unfortunately I don't have here with me, I really should have brought that one along, but it shows the infectious rate of every disease and, how many people are likely to be infected by each person. And COVID-19 is actually very low compared to, say, measles. Like it's incredibly low compared to, say, the measles. It's not actually that infectious. And then here's the other part of it is that we're talking about something between 50 to 80% of people in the research that I've read and guys, it's tough these days, right? It's tough to find credible information. So I'm doing the best I can. But it seems at this point that between 50 to 80% of the people that contract COVID are asymptomatic or only mildly irritated by it. In fact, let's go to the case of Lily. I mean, a perfect example right here on the show. And so,
Exactly.
I think that, I don't think
So
that.
why did they shut down the world?
I think there were a number of things that happened. I think that there was a definite issue around hospital surge because in as much as the fact that it was largely going after people that were already sick, there are a lot of people that are sick. The food industry's been devastating us for decades. And so in populations with high population density, and by the way, it's really dangerous when you have a population of high population density with a dense population, like people that are ignoring the rules and that kind of stuff, like it just combines to make things all the worse. And so what happens in a lot of those places is, of course, a lot of people get sick because guess what? There is prolific obesity, there's prolific diabetes, there's prolific hypertension. And so a lot of people were getting sick and those people end up going to the hospitals. They cause a hospital surge. And as a result, now people can't get enough treatment. And I think that was a genuine thing and it was causing an issue. I do have some legitimate questions about whether the lockdown was appropriate everywhere. I think that in places with lower population density and complicit populations, maybe it wasn't as necessary, but that's not my debate for today. My debate for today is if we had taken sugar out in the 1950s, we wouldn't have had a lockdown of any kind, as far as I can tell.
Can they fix it? Can they get rid of sugar now?
Well, here we are. We're in this bizarre place where it's like, well, you can't tell me what to eat. You can't tell me what to put in my body. You can't legislate what I put in my body unless you put it in a syringe. And so what I would suggest is that we need an unbelievable wholesale adjustment to our relationship with sugar. We need that. And that said, I'm really more of a libertarian. I'm into independent thought and so forth. I believe that you have the right to make your own decisions. But here's the thing. I don't want to participate in a global healthcare system where people are making their own decisions about sugar. I am all for universal healthcare. I am just not for equal pay. When I see like this woman on Twitter the other day, she wrote this. I saw it. I couldn't believe it. She goes, I don't care what you say. I have the right to have my double sugar latte and donut every morning, and it's none of your business. All right. I agree that it's none of my business, but I don't want to be in the same healthcare program as her. Or I want her healthcare program being funded by the very things she's eating that are going to cause her to consume the resources of that healthcare system. So can we do something about it today now? We can educate. Look, people around the world are waking up to this. The statistics coming out from COVID-19 appear undeniable. So people are definitely waking up. There are a lot of people asking themselves questions and saying, a lot of people are asking themselves the question, like, how do I change at this point? The trouble we know, the difficulty, Debbie, is that willpower doesn't really work, and people are struggling with that. A person can sit here on a Monday and say, I've heard what Eric has to say, and I'm going to change my relationship with sugar. I really am. I'm in. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. And then the very next day, they can find themselves making an exception. And then they make that exception, and then that exception becomes the rule, and then they're back on the slippery slope. And what we have to recognize is, that we have a situation where we have a food manufacturing industry that is driven by profits, and they're using those profits to influence education, legislation, and regulation in order to boost their profits further. And so we need to fix it at every level. The first level I believe that we should fix it at is the level of you and me, and the level of the people around us, and the level of our children. We need to get clear that when we buy something that has sugar in it, we are rewarding them for putting sugar in it. I suggest that next time you walk into a grocery store and you pick up a jar of tomato sauce and you see sugar as the number 2 ingredient, you just smash that jar on the floor. Now, you might get arrested for this behavior, but if enough of us do it, they'll stop putting the stuff on the shelves. Now, of course, I'm not inciting anybody to do
They
this.
won't arrest me.
So, Debbie, I hope that answered your question. It's a real pleasure to have you on the show from the old country.
I'm a Wildfit fan. Don't worry.
Oh, good deal. And Debbie, where are you living?
Durban.
Oh, you're in Durban, so you're actually in South Africa. Well, I am one.
Yeah.
I've created my list of post-pandemic places I need to be, and I can tell you that on that list is Nelspruit and the Kruger Park, and I'm on my way. And so I miss Africa every single day.
Have you been watching the live safaris?
I have, and they've just been like one of the highlights.
Unbelievable.
One of the highlights for me to be able to watch those. I remember years ago when Africam first started, and you could watch in the Kruger Park from your desk. So I'm glad that we can do that these days. Yeah. Debbie, thank you so much for coming and visiting on the show with us. Welcome, and see you next time.
Cheers. Bye.
Hello, Alina. How are you?
Oh my God. Hello. Am I really live? I cannot.
You are really live.
My heart is pounding. You have no idea. I'm such a huge fan of you, and I just would like to take a moment to tell you thank you, because all of your ideas have been so transformative for me and empowering, and my whole life has really, really improved within last year. Like last year after I took the Wild Food Challenge, and really, it's crazy. Thank you so much.
You're very, very welcome. Thank you for sharing.
And all of the videos that I could possibly find of you online, speaking of different issues, just somehow, I don't know, 80% of everything you say is just a little bit different, but changes the whole perception and the whole perception to the problem. So therefore, I don't know, it's very insightful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And so now coming back to the topic, and the sugar influence on our bodies, I wanted to ask you. So how you have this different opinion and perception on how our body is trying to communicate to us, and different organs purposes. For example, how you say that the tonsils are there to prevent us putting food in our body to help body to recover. What is your opinion on autoimmune diseases? What do you think bodies are trying to communicate there? And for example, would you say that like sugar could have a lot to do with this, for example, with the thyroid function and other common autoimmune disease problems?
You know, I think, again, much like I said earlier with cancer, you know, autoimmune is a big, big name. It's a big like title. You know, there's a lot of different influences when it comes to autoimmune disease. What I would like to suggest is this is my version, and my version kind of says, well, hang on, what does autoimmune disease mean? What it means is your immune system is attacking you. Like your immune system is working contrary to you, autoimmune disease. So why is it doing that? Well, hold on a second. And this is probably the simplest way I can explain this, but you are what you eat. And so if you eat bad things, your body's going to attack you, and you're going to have an autoimmune disease. Now, this is a massive oversimplification, and many doctors will come along and say, it doesn't quite work like that. But I would suggest to you that when you eat particularly plants, many plants are trying to defend themselves against being eaten and digested. And so they have a variety of ways of doing that. They use thorns to defend themselves physically, but that's quite obvious and you can avoid them. But then they also use biochemical defenses like enzyme blockers and hormone triggers and lectins. And so what I believe happens is that when we eat some of those plants, particularly the New World plants that come from the Americas that we don't have the evolved relationship with, that some of those chemicals are making their way into our body. So some of those lectins, for example, are getting through the gut, leaky gut, like they're getting through. And then the body is trying to defend against those things and having to attack the tissues where those things are. And so I believe that our diet is actually the single biggest influence when it comes to autoimmune disease. And I would suggest that, sugar may not be the most direct culprit there, but I would suggest that it's probably related, and having the system stressed out by excess sugar consumption it generally is bad for inflammation, which is generally going to be bad for autoimmune disease. So that's my non-medical, non-scientific, just plain thinking view on autoimmune disease.
Okay, thank you so much.
Hey, you're very, very welcome. It's such a pleasure to have you here on the show.
I'm gonna cry now. From the happiness, honestly. Such a huge fan. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks. For all of you that are watching, don't worry. Kelsey is very good. Whenever a fan comes on and says, Kelsey just pushes me right back down to earth every time, so I'm safe. Right, Kelsey? And don't use smart mouth. I'll put you live on the screen. I can do it. She doesn't believe me. All right, we are going to go to Audrey. Audrey has been on the show before. Audrey, it's good to have you here. Audrey, let me cue you up and say hello. Audrey, welcome to Thrive Time. Good to have you back.
Thank you. I just had a quick question for you, and possibly a follow-up, but where do you find good information when these studies on people who, when you look back on who's had it? Because I know there's some people who've said they feel like they were very, very healthy and had it, and trying to get the backstory to that, it'd be really curious to know what that credible source is.
Wow, that's really the tough part, because at this point, it's almost like there's no credible source. And what you have to try and do is, like, you look at one source and know which way it leans, and look at another source and know which way it leans, and try to find this spot in the middle. But here's where it can get interesting. You can read an article, say, on Fox News, and then you can read the same story on CNN, and it'll be a completely different story, but they're often referencing the same scientific study. So I'll just go to the study. I'll just go directly to the study and say, I want to read that. I want to go read what they read. And I'm amazed. Tucker Carlson, his capacity for reading stuff and misconstruing it, he's got a black belt. Anderson Cooper can do it, but he's not in Tucker's league as far as I'm concerned, right? And so what I want to do is go and look at the source data. Here's a good example. Of course, we can ask some legitimate questions as to whether we trust the CDC or whether we trust the World Health Organization. And, we can ask those questions all the time. But what I decide is I take a look and go, all right, the raw data that the CDC is producing, I'm going to choose to believe that the scientists and the statisticians that are working on the raw data are doing the best they can to work on raw data. Where most of the twisting, I believe, takes place is once the raw data makes its way out to the press, and then the press takes that raw data and spins it in some way and creates a meaning from it that doesn't really exist. We have to remember that, when I grew up, and Audrey, I imagine that you probably experienced some of this as well, but there was a time when they actually told us the news. You would like the deal that the federal government in the United States and many other governments around the world made with the news agencies was, yes, we will let you use the airwaves because the government owned the airwaves. We will let you use the airwaves, but you must educate the population as to what's going on at 6 o'clock every evening. That's the deal. 6 o'clock, you're going to go on and you're going to go, welcome to ABC News. These are some things that are actually happening today, and they don't include the Kardashians. But then the trouble is that somewhere along the line, the Kardashians became more important than quantitative easing, which is mind-blowing to me. And so now we're at a place where news has become a product. If you want to understand why the paparazzi are terrorizing people, they're terrorizing them because they think you want them to. They think that you as the consumer want them to. I saw somebody asking this question with what's going on with the minister in England with all this, what's his name? Cummings, I think. And he's like being harassed by the press. And somebody on Facebook goes, why is the press doing this to him? Well, you just posted their article. So don't you understand that by posting their article, you rewarded them for doing it? They got paid to do it. You paid them to do it. And so we're in a place right now where we have to understand that the press is not on our side, they're on their side. And so somehow we have to ask the question you asked, and that is, where can we go for credible information? I tend to suggest that proper peer-reviewed studies are a good place to start. I found one the other day, for example, that's an ongoing study that's happening in China at the moment, where they're testing vitamin C as a treatment for people that are critically ill with COVID-19. And here's what they've been finding so far in that study, that it is 30% effective at saving lives over placebo. Now, that's one study. That doesn't mean vitamin C is the cure-all for everything, but what it tells me is that there's a chance here that vitamin C plays an important role, which, I've been saying that for 8-9 weeks now. You got to get your magnesium, vitamin C, zinc, and, keep yourself generally healthy. But what we want to do is not rely on the scaremongering and the fake news spreading and the rubbish that's happening online. And I know we've done an episode on that, but I just want to make this point about that too. And I think it's an important point that just isn't being made. I was talking to a friend of mine last night about this, and he goes, yeah, well, sometimes I share an article. I haven't read the whole thing, but the headline caught my attention, and et cetera, et cetera. And I go, well, then you're part of the problem. You see, guys, it's entirely possible that we need to be taking a look at what Bill Gates is doing and what the WHO is doing and what the CDC is doing and what Fauci's up to. It's entirely possible that we need to take a healthier look at EMFs, electromagnetic frequencies. It's entirely possible that we should be looking into all those things. But when somebody logs onto the internet and spreads lies about those things, when they spread fake news about those things, they then cause Facebook and YouTube and everybody else to develop algorithms to try to take out those lies, because it's the responsibility to do that. When you lie about Bill Gates, a newspaper knows that they can't print that lie. Well, Facebook is in that same situation. So now the problem is that when somebody spreads lies, they force censorship, and then the censorship bucket gets too big and it stops us all from talking about what we need to be talking about. And so, yes, Audrey, we definitely need to start looking into our sources. And one of the things that we can all do is do not repost stuff that you don't know is true. And definitely don't post stuff that you know is not true. That would be an outstanding start. Audrey, thanks so much for stopping in again on the show. It's always a pleasure to see you.
Thank you. Can I ask one real quick question?
Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
So in these conversations about sugar and vulnerability to external illnesses and inflammation and autoimmune disease, am I on the right track of thinking that, I don't get sick very often, but I've had chronic inflammation for a long time. So I'm thinking that the external is a lot of it, I guess the inflammation would be more of the plant and potential lectin consumption and other. Why am I not getting sick normally, but still inflamed all the time?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we tend to forget is we tend to think of sickness as this one thing, like I'm sick. But the truth is that sickness is almost always is a cumulative thing in our world. In our world, there's any number of things. Like if you've got mold in your house, then you might start developing symptoms. If you're eating plants that are high in a lot of lectins, you're going to be irritating your digestive system and possibly cause inflammation and other things. If you're eating a great deal of sugar or carbohydrates, you're going to stress out your pancreas and also cause potential inflammation, and so on and so forth. And so for most of us, it's not like there's this one thing that's a problem. But the good news is for you, where you're generally healthy, and you're not really sick, but you're experiencing inflammation, what that says to you is your body's irritated about something, right? And so what's your body irritated about? Well, you can now take a look at how to deal with that by your habits. And what I would suggest is go on an elimination diet. And I'll tell you, and this is not a popular point of view, but I'll share it anyway. Here it is. If you want to figure out what's going on with inflammation, I would suggest doing an elimination fast. And so what does that mean? It means you go on a 2 or 3 day fast on only water for a little while, and then you start to reintroduce things. But I would do it differently than you've probably been told in the past, because I would reintroduce meat first. I would introduce meat first, and you'll notice that will not cause an inflammation problem for you at all. I would introduce meat and maybe some eggs and that sort of stuff. And then slowly, I would take a look at introducing the various plants that you eat from time to time. And somewhere along the line, you will notice that plants are generally the cause. Now, this doesn't mean that plants are bad, in my opinion. What it means is that the prolonged and continual ingestion of the same plants every single day will cause a toxic buildup that might then trigger problems, including autoimmune disease, inflammation, and so forth. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm a creature of habit, so that's a good potential, but it's just not broad enough.
Just remember that in our historical past, Mother Nature, and Mother Nature just being a euphemism for the natural world, would not allow you to eat the same plant day in and day out because everything was seasonal. And so you would have been forced into some form of variety. And so now we have to bring consciousness to the conversation and introduce that variety intentionally.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Good to have you back. All right. We are going to go over to Annie. Annie, I hope your sound is good. I hope you're good. Nice to have you on the show. Welcome, Annie. Say hello to everybody.
Hi.
Hello.
Is it working?
Yes.
All right. So I was just wanting to ask you about the fasting, because I know that when I did WildFit in 2017, and I became a WildFit coach, I remember there was a big thing about not fasting right away, and I've since kind of like gone down that slippery slope that you were talking about. However, when I've been talking to the doctor, I've gone through and I've reversed diabetes. Now I've gone like past the pre-diabetes, and I think it's because of even though I've been eating the poor food, I've been eating enough of the good food, and then having breaks from the sugar from fasting, that my A1C level has gone to actually normal.
So tell me, what's your question exactly?
Yeah, so I wanted to have your perspective, more perspective about what you think about fasting, and
well, I think
like,
fasting
becoming
is
really much more popular thing now. So I thought,
absolutely, fasting is absolutely a good idea. There's no question about it. The reason that we don't have a great deal of fasting inside the core WildFit 90 program is that in one of the principles of WildFit is to build your self-esteem and to make you feel good. And so the more rules we were to create for a client, the more opportunity there would be for them to fail. And so introducing fasting or intermittent fasting just creates one more thing for people to fail at. And that's not really what the core WildFit program is about. Now, once somebody moves beyond that, and then they get to a new place where when they've gone through the WildFit program and they've changed their relationship with food, what we now want to do is introduce for them the possibility to do things like intermittent fasting or longer term fasting. Let's remember that nature would absolutely have created the circumstances at times where there was a problem with food availability. And so we would have been forced into things like regular intermittent fasting and even longer term fasting from time to time. There are many functions of the body that operate better when we've had a period of fasting. I'll give you a very good example. We all talk very commonly about the core sort of like fuels that we burn, and those fuels are fat and sugar. We all know about that. But what we don't always talk about is the fact that our bodies can also burn protein. And they do this. Our body does this in times of stress and in extreme fasts. And people go, well, that's bad. You shouldn't do that. Well, it's not bad, because you see, the body is incredibly intelligent and it's an incredibly brilliant design. And so when it burns protein as an energy source, it burns the oldest and most diseased proteins first. So it's like a cleansing process. It actually, like a lion is taking out the weakest gazelles. A lion is taking out the weakest wildebeest and the weakest buffalo in order for the herd to be healthier. Our body does the same thing. Sorry?
Autophagy, right?
Autophagy, exactly right. And so, so fasting, I think, is an incredibly important aspect of our health. And I believe that I think it's good to do it in supervision, and I think it's good to do it in the right environments. But even intermittent fasting, it's just such common sense. When I've been out, hanging out with and hunting with the Hadza Bushmen and that kind of stuff, we go days and days and days and hours without food sometimes. That's absolutely part of the deal. And so, guess what? You don't get weaker when you're not eating food. You actually get stronger because you're not expending all this energy digesting your food. And that makes sense, because it's time to go hunting and I want to be strong right now. So, yeah, Annie, I'm all about intermittent fasting and longer term fasting from time to time.
So I have another question.
Go for it.
Or actually a request, because I'm back here visiting my daughter, and she has done Wild Fit and is a big fan. However, she has gotten back onto dairy and has hives. So she now takes it like, oh, I'm going to eat this food and I'm going to take this hit.
Well, listen, while I'm not happy to hear that, here's the great news: is at least she's conscious of it, right? Like at least she's conscious of it, which means she's, like, here's what you want to do: go grab a label, get yourself a label maker and grab a label, and if she's got like milk or cheese in the food, just relabel it like liquid hives. Like moldy. I'm of course kidding, but in a sense, that's what she's doing, and so there will come a point in time when that consciousness will give her freedom back. But here's the thing: what she has is a level of food consciousness that most people don't have, because most people don't understand the relationship between those two things. So at least she understands. At least she's not unconscious. She's going, I'm willing to accept the hives because I want this. Now, what she has to disassociate from in order to make that work is the long-term health implications of dairy products. It's unfortunate, but what as a mom and a Wild Fit coach, because you've been through our training, so you'll know this for sure, the more you try to push her, the less likely you're going to be able to get her to change. So all you can do is be the change you want to see in your daughter, and eventually she'll come around, in my hope and estimation.
Yeah. Thank you.
Annie, thanks for being on the show. See you next time. Jerry is coming up next. Jerry, tell us where you're from and say hello to everybody. You are live. Hello, Jerry.
Yeah, hi. No, I'm in Las Vegas, Nevada.
Hey, Jerry.
And hi. So from listening to the conversation, in the United States, it's a very big thing, and it gets back to what you were discussing with Debbie before about we value our freedom and we value, self-choice. And at the same time, marketing is very, very powerful. I mean, so the whole sugar, it's all marketing. The question I have for you is, do you think it's possible to have a counter positive marketing about, like, instead of talking about the evils of sugar, more like the positives about being well and healthy, or do you think it wouldn't work here?
Well, I think we do have to have some of that, but I think what we have to remember is that people are far more motivated to move away from pain than they are to move toward pleasure. So that's why shock works. That's why, you see the press is always reporting bad news, because it's what catches people's attention. So, that's why you don't have that's why all these you have a bunch of newspapers out there that print only good news, but they don't do very well. They just don't, because the problem is good news makes you feel optimistic. When you're feeling optimistic, you don't feel the need for certainty, so you're not looking to the news to get your certainty. When you go to the news and get freaked out, you feel uncertain. You go back to the news to get more certainty, you feel more uncertain. I mean, it's a loop, and they've got it by design. So in terms of advertising, I think that we're in a place where, we can run all kinds of great campaigns about the good news of working on being healthy. But the truth is that sugar is shockingly bad for us. And if we don't get that information out to people, then we're doing them a massively huge disservice. And here's the other thing, Jerry, and this is tough and inconvenient, but their budgets are phenomenal. They have millions and millions and millions of dollars to lobby our governments, to affect our education, to place their vending machines in our schools, to influence our very psychology. And so we're going to have to figure out how to advertise against that, because there's no profit in stopping the eating of sugar. And that's where we need to be able to rely on government. Listen, I'm a bit of a conservative, and I'm not interested in having massive government taking over everything. I'm really clear about capitalism. Capitalism is the best of a bunch of bad systems of running countries. And one of the major problems with capitalism is that it can be abused. And that's what the government is supposed to be doing. They're supposed to be protecting us from that abuse. They're supposed to be making sure that those companies are not making profit at our expense. And in the case of sugar and diabetes treatment, they are failing at a level that is impossible to comprehend. I can tell you that an independent, like an internal, I should say, government research project determined that Obamacare was going to save the American people about $10 billion a year. Seems like a lot of money, more money than I could spend in a weekend, but it's a tiny amount of money when you recognize that diabetes is costing the American healthcare system $300 million. So billion, you spell it with a B, $1 billion a year. In other words, they're saving about $10 on every 300 that diabetes is costing us. It's insane. And so we're at a place where we need to absolutely change our approach to education and our approach to taxation, our approach to regulation and our approach to lobbying, because the very government that is supposed to be, and the governments around the world that are supposed to be protecting us from the sugar industries, are being bought by the food manufacturers and sugar industry. And that's a problem.
Yeah.
Good to have you on the show, Jerry. Thank you so much. We're going to go now over to Mel. Mel, say hello. Where are you from?
Oh, hiya. I'm from South Wales in the UK.
Oh, good deal. Nice to have you back. So, Mel, what can I do for you?
I was just wondering, listening to some of the comments sort of about WildFit, and also when you were saying about taking the lady talking about inflammation and taking a fast, and then the first thing you do is have meat. What if you're vegetarian? You know, what do you do in those instances? And is WildFit good for somebody who's a non-meat eater?
Well, Mel, you know, this does open up a larger and more fascinating conversation. I was a vegetarian for very, very many years, and I'm not anymore. And there's a lot of reasons for that. We don't necessarily need to go into it at the moment. So let me answer this in stages. The concept of the elimination diet can be done by somebody, whether they're vegetarian or not. The only difference you would do is you would go on a small fast to clean, you give your body a break from everything, and then you would slowly introduce things, and you would introduce things and then watch your symptoms day by day by day. And so you would use the exact same method. You just wouldn't include meat or eggs necessarily in that. So you might go off and say, all right, today I'm going to have some broccoli, and you eat broccoli. And you notice, do I have any reactions? Do I have any itchy throat? Do I have any inflammation? You know, did my skin get irritated? Nope. Okay, now let's move to the next thing. And you might add some carrots, and then all of a sudden you might add eggplant. You go, oh, look at that. When I added the eggplant, I had a symptom. And so you'd start to recognize which plants were causing you irritation. Now, unfortunately, not all irritation is that immediate, but it often can be. And so I would suggest that is you would just modify the earlier suggestion by doing that. Now, to your other question about, is WildFit suitable for somebody who's a vegetarian? Yeah, we've had like thousands, I would argue, vegetarians and vegans that do the program. We're remarkably successful in India. I don't understand how that could be, but I will tell you, Mel, that probably in the realm of 50% of the vegetarians that come in and do WildFit will revisit their vegetarianism, and they will become what we might think of as being slightly more flexitarian. And that's a larger conversation maybe for another day, but absolutely bearing in mind that WildFit is largely about food psychology. The food psychology aspects of what we teach are incredibly important, irrespective of whether somebody's vegetarian or not.
Okay.
Cool. Anything else?
Yeah. No, probably, but.
So I don't know if you've ever heard me talk about this, but I used to play roller hockey for a team in I used to have to go through. It was actually in Cornwall, but I played ice hockey in Cardiff, in Wales, and I used to play in the Cardiff Arena. And then I played roller hockey in Cornwall, go through Wales. And anyway, I had my time. I was like, Sarah Palin said, I understand the Russians because I can see Russia across the bay. Well, I used to be able to see Cardiff from my bedroom window in Weston-super-Mare. So anyway, good to have you on the show. Thank you so much, Mel.
Thank you. Bye.
We are going to talk to, hey, I've got Marcus coming up, but I'm not seeing his camera, Kelsey. So let's see if it works out okay. Marcus, let's see if we can get you happening here. Oh, there we go. It seems to be sorting itself out as we go over here. Marcus, there you are. Good to have you on the show.
Hey, Eric. 2 questions. One is related to sources also, and not the recent stuff about COVID, but the old thing about when the Harvard guys were bought to put that whole story with sugar and fat into the world. Do you have something, reliable to pass on to people that I tell the story?
Oh, it was mainstream media press. You can find it. Google it. I can help you with that, but it was mainstream media press. It's not a secret conspiracy theory. It was absolutely outed by the mainstream press. The name of I'll bet you there's a Wikipedia article on it. Not that that's the greatest source in the world, but what I'm saying is this is not some hidden conspiracy theory thing. It legitimately happened.
Okay. And the second one, as you know, I did WildFit, and I for 2.5 years now, I drink my Alka-Seltzer, my green smoothie in the morning. And lately, we've been putting wild herbs from around the area, from the woods. My wife has more time, and she's going out and getting to know the plants. And so we have a wide variety. But I heard you like twice today say there are plants that have stuff in them that, because I was always like, if it's green, it's good. It's leave out the sugar and the grains and the milk and eat everything green. So you were saying there is stuff that I should watch out for if I do it too much or eat too much of it.
Yeah, I think the best way to put this is that every living organism pretty much is trying to defend itself against getting eaten. They don't want to be eaten. Gazelles run really fast, or animals use their claws and their teeth, and they use their defense mechanisms to prevent being hunted and so forth. Some animals use biochemical defenses, like the skunk or the water buck in sub-Saharan Africa. They have an oil in their skin so that if a lion is chasing them, they run into the water, and then the crocodiles won't come after them because they have a biochemical defense. But mostly we are, we have physical defenses in the animal kingdom. Plants also use physical defenses. They use thorns. There are leaves that are thorns, and bark that are thorns, and seeds that are thorns, and thorns that are thorns. Like thorns have evolved in a variety of different ways, but that's the physical defenses. Then plants also mount a biochemical defense against getting eaten. And so those biochemical defenses come in the form of, as I mentioned earlier, like enzyme blockers that are designed to slow digestion down to make sure the seeds have a chance to get through the body, or hormone triggers designed to speed up the digestive process and liquefy things and move it out more quickly. Bitter tannins that make it not palatable to begin with in the first place. And of course, lectins and, a variety of different ways of defending themselves. So now our ancestors, of course, had to evolve to deal with those defense mechanisms, and they did. And so there are many plants that we are quite good at eating, but generally those are old world plants where we've had a long, many hundreds of thousands of years relationship with. There are many plants that are in our diet today that are new world plants, that are plants that humans really never had a relationship with. And the plants that come from the Americas fall into that category pretty firmly. So that's why we know that so many of the nightshade plants are far from ideal. We know that nightshade plants are often many people that are allergic to plants are allergic specifically to nightshade plants. So, and guess where they're from? They're from the New World. And so for the most part, I would say it's really important to remember that we keep a seasonal relationship with all plants, that we don't eat any plant every single day, or we don't eat any food every single day. The only thing you should have every single day, two things: air and water. And, and the rest of it, you should have a degree of seasonal rotation with. And then seasonal rotation with plants is a good idea. And then I think we should have a careful relationship with the New World plants. We should always be skeptical. I think that we should be careful about corn. I think we should be careful about potatoes. I think we should be careful about tomatoes. I think we should be careful about, what did I mention earlier? Eggplant, for example. And so I think that those plants, I'm not saying you should never have them. I've got tomatoes in my fridge right now. I eat tomatoes from time to time, but I certainly don't do it anything like daily, because I know that if I do, I'm risking inflammation and my body fighting against it.
Okay, so I will look out for nightshade plants, lectins, and make myself even smarter about what's in there.
That's the approach, seasonal rotation of your plants, and seasonal rotation of your plants. And I think that you'll find that is a great way to handle it. And even taking a full break from them from time to time. Remember that would have happened in nature. The rain stopped, suddenly there's no plants around. Like, there was always cyclical patterns to our survival and to the way we were eating. So I think it's really good if we can try and duplicate that in our lives today. Cool.
But what do I eat if I don't eat plants? I mean, just meat.
Well, yeah. I mean, meat, eggs, seeds, nuts. Well, those obviously fall into the plants category, but they're a little bit different because you see, most nuts, their defense mechanism is in the shell. And so once you've broken the shell over, many nuts are just, pure fat and calories. So it's not that big a deal comparatively. You probably don't want to eat, you want to remember, like, you wouldn't have been able to eat like a bucket of them. So you probably want to slow that down a little bit. But Marcus, I'll share an unpopular opinion with you. If you stuck me on a desert island and told me that I had a choice between eating meat or plants, and I had to do that for a year, I would take meat. I would take meat because there's not a single nutrient, not one nutrient that a human being needs that's not available in meat. Whereas in order to get all of your nutritional requirements met by plants, there's a wide variety of plants that you need to eat. And I mean, we're talking right down to vitamin C, guys. Organ meats are full of vitamin C. There's nothing that a human needs that isn't also available in meat. Now, I know this opens up a larger can of worms and conversation that might irritate some of the more vegetarian leaning people in the crowd. I get that. I'm sorry. I don't mean to. I'm hoping that's not offensive to you. I'm just stating a nutritional reality that there's not one nutrient that humans need that they can't get from animal sources. Whereas to get those same nutrients from plants requires a much wider variety of seasonal rotation of food and that kind of stuff. Plus, animals are not fighting your digestive system ever. They're just not, because all their fighting was done before. Plants are fighting your digestive system the entire time.
Okay.
Cool?
Cool. Yeah, thank you.
Hey, Marcus, good to have you on the show as always. Nice to see you. Guys, I really have enjoyed today's episode a whole lot. I think it's an important conversation, and I'm happy to continue having it. I want to touch on this, and that is that we are at a time in history that is giving us a great deal of perspective. And we're going to see a lot of data coming out over the next little while about what really happened with this pandemic. And was the lockdown really the right approach? And was it the right approach everywhere that it was practiced? And how many lives were cost by the lockdown versus how many were saved? These are all legitimate questions. And we should be allowed to have those questions. We should be allowed to have those questions and those discussions without everybody getting angry about it, because we're never going to get to the truth if everybody gets all angry about it. I saw somebody posting the other day that you guys are so irresponsible fighting against the lockdown. And I simply posted one question, and I said, do you have any idea how many lives are being cost by the lockdown? And they go, what do you mean? And I go, well, every 1% that unemployment increases, you have a 3% increase in suicide and overdose death. So there are people that are being killed by the lockdown. I think I saw this in LA County the other day, that one of the health advisors there was suggesting that they've just had a year worth of suicide attempts in a month. And so I think what we need to do is we need to not get caught up in the politics of this. We need to get caught up in the reality of it. And as the data starts coming out about what really happened, we need to understand that there will be food manufacturers that will, just like the sugar industry did in the 1950s, do everything they can to protect their market share. And so we, the people of the earth, need to pay attention to what's really going on. And we need to have real conversations like we're having right here today about what's really happening. And we need to recognize that it's our responsibility. It's not our fault, but it is our responsibility. So important to get that. If you have a friend that is overweight, if you have a friend that's diabetic, if you have a friend that's hypertensive, if you have a friend that has a lifestyle disease, then what I want to suggest to you is it is not their fault, but they will be the ones to live with the consequence if they don't sort it out. And so it is their responsibility to do something about it. And I believe that one of the very best ways that we can support people in making change in their life is for us to be the change that we want to see in the people around us. Thank you guys for being back for another episode of Thrive Time. I'll see you next week.